Imagine a dusty diary hidden for years, pulling Miss Jane Marple into a chilling mystery. Eliza Gray, a shy maid, vanished from Mead house in 1955, called a runaway until Miss Marple's notes reveal murder. A blood-stained apron, an oily cloth, a secret locket, and a doctor's dark confession point to a deadly party night. With a clever trap under a moonlit oak, Miss Marple unmasks a killer and finds Eliza's bones by the river. Dive into a village web of fear, lies, and buried truth, where one old lady's sharp eyes unravel it all. Chapter 1. The Hidden Diary. The rain pattered softly against the windows of Miss Jane Marple's cottage in St. Mary Mead, a small village where everyone knew everyone's business. Inside, the fire crackled in the hearth, casting a warm glow. Over the cozy room, Miss Marple, a small old lady with white hair and sharp blue eyes, sat in her favorite armchair, a ball of soft gray wool in her lap. Her knitting needles clicked steadily, working a scarf, but her mind was restless. Rainy days were for tidying, she thought, and today she'd decided to sort through her old books. A task long overdue. The cottage was neat but full of treasures, books, teacups, and little keepsakes from years of quiet adventures. Miss Marple stood, her black dress rustling, and moved to a wooden bookshelf in the corner. It was stuffed with novels, gardening guides, and old journals, their spines faded from time. She pulled out a heavy book on roses, sneezing as dust puffed into the air. As she set it down, something slipped from behind the shelf, thudding to the floor. She bent down, her knees creaking, and picked up a small leather diary, its cover worn but strong, tied with a faded ribbon. Miss Marple's heart gave a little jump. She knew this diary. Her fingers traced the embossed initials on the cover, J. Mand. She untied the ribbon, opening to the first page. In her own neat handwriting, it read, Jane Marple, 1955. 10 years ago. She hadn't seen this diary in ages, tucked away like a forgotten secret. She settled back in her chair, the fire's warmth on her face, and began to read. The pages were filled with her thoughts, village gossip, and notes on her garden. But one entry stopped her cold. It was about a case she'd never solved: the disappearance of Eliza Gray. Eliza was a young maid, just 19, who worked at Mead house. It's a grand mansion owned by the Bantry family. She'd vanished after a summer party in 1955, leaving behind only a shawl found by the riverbank. The police called her a runaway, saying she'd fled to London for a better life. But Miss Marple's diary told a different story. Her notes, sharp and clear, hinted at something darker. Eliza hadn't run. She'd been scared, maybe hurt. Eliza. Miss Marple's fingers tightened on the diary, her needles still. This wasn't just a memory. It was a cold case, begging to be warmed up. The diary described Eliza as shy, with soft brown hair and a nervous smile. She'd worked hard cleaning and serving at Mead, but she'd been uneasy in the weeks before she disappeared. Miss Marple had written about seeing her at the party, her hands trembling as she poured drinks. The guests had been a lively bunch, Mr. and Mrs. Bantry, the hosts, Dr. Finch, the village doctor, Mr. Cobb, the gruff gardener, and a dozen others, laughing and dancing under lanterns. But Eliza had stood out, not for her work, but for her fear. Miss Marple's entry noted a locket Eliza wore, heart-shaped with a rose on it, a gift she never took off. When her shawl was found, the locket was gone. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. As she read on, she jotted down odd details the police ignored. Eliza's fear of Mr. Cobb, who'd been seen digging near the riverbank the night of the party. A late-night argument she'd overheard between Mr. Bantry and an unknown man by the stables. And a stain on the shawl, faint but suspicious, like blood. The police had brushed it off, saying Eliza was flighty. But Miss Marple's notes were firm. She hadn't believed it then, and she didn't now. Her knitting needles clicked again, slower as her mind raced. Why had she stopped pursuing this? Had life in St. Mary Mead pulled her away, or had she missed something? She flipped through the diary, finding a sketch of the locket, its rose engraving clear in her careful lines. Another page listed names from the party, with question marks by some. Mr. Cobb, why so quiet? Dr. Finch, too friendly with Eliza. Mr. Bantry, angry that night. Miss Marple's heart beat faster. This diary wasn't just a record. 'Twas a map, pointing to clues she'd gathered but never followed. She'd been younger then, still sharp but less bold, trusting the police too much. Now, with years of mysteries behind her, she felt a spark. Eliza deserved the truth, and Miss Marple could give it to her. The rain slowed to a drizzle, and Miss Marple stood, her cane tapping the floor. Dane Mead House was still there, though the Bantrys had moved away after Mr. Bantry's death. The new owner, Mrs. Lila Trent, was a young widow, kind but nervous, who'd bought the mansion last year. Miss Marple decided to visit to see if the house held any echoes of Eliza. She tucked the diary into her knitting bag, its weight a promise. The fire popped, and she smiled faintly. Cold cases were like her knitting, tangled at first, but with patience. Every knot came loose. She thought of St. Mary Mead, its neat cottages and nosy neighbors. The village hadn't forgotten Eliza, though the story had faded. Old Mrs. Price at the bakery still whispered about the poor maid who ran off. And Tommy, the grocer's boy, loved ghost tales about Dane Mead's grounds. Miss Marple knew better than to trust gossip, but it could point to truth, like a crooked signpost. She'd start with Mrs. Trent, then track down anyone from 1955 still in the village, Mr. Cobb. Maybe, or Mrs. Bantry if she was alive. The diary was her guide, and her sharp eyes would do the rest. Miss Marple pulled on her coat, sturdy black one, and tied her hat. The rain had left the air fresh, and the path to Dane Mead was short, winding past the church and the village green. She stepped outside, her cane steady on the whetstones, her knitting bag slung over her arm. The diary felt heavy, its pages full of questions. Eliza Gray hadn't just vanished, she'd been silenced, and someone at that party knew why. Miss Marple's needles clicked in her mind, weaving the past into the present. The truth was out. They're buried but not gone, and she'd dig it up, one stitch at a time. Chapter 2. Echoes of Eliza. The rain had stopped in St. Mary Mead, leaving the village air fresh and the cobblestone path slick. Miss Jane Marple sat by her cottage window, the fire crackling behind her, her knitting needles still in her lap. The leather diary she'd found yesterday lay open on the table, its pages yellowed but sharp with secrets. Her neat handwriting from 1955 told the story of Eliza Gray, a young maid who vanished from Dane Mead House after a summer party. The police had called her a runaway, but Miss Marple's notes about Eliza's fear, a missing locket, a suspicious shawl, and an overheard argument pointed to something darker. The diary was a call to action, and Miss Marple's sharp eyes were ready to answer. She read late into the night, the fire's glow dancing on the pages. Eliza was 19, shy, with soft brown hair and a quiet way that made her fade into the background. She'd worked at Dane Mead House, the grand mansion owned by Mr. and Mrs. Bantry, cleaning rooms and serving tea. The party in 1955 was a big event, with lanterns strung across the gardens and guests in fine clothes. Miss Marple had been there, a quiet observer, noticing Eliza's trembling hands as she poured drinks. The diary noted her fear of Mr. Cobb, the gardener who'd been seen digging near the riverbank that night. It mentioned a heart-shaped locket with a rose engraving, a gift Eliza wore always gone when her shawl was found. And it described an argument Miss Marple overheard by the stables. Mr. Bantry's voice sharp against an unknown man's low murmur. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, her mind weaving the clues. The police had dismissed the case, saying Eliza ran to London, tired of village life. But the shawl, found tangled in riverside bushes, had a faint stain, blood Miss Marple suspected, though the police called it mud. Her diary was firm. Eliza hadn't run. She was scared, maybe hurt, and someone at that party knew why. Miss Marple felt a pang of guilt. She'd let the case drop 10 years ago, distracted by village life. Now, with a diary in hand, she had a chance to make it right. She closed the diary, its leather cover cool under her fingers, and stood, her black dress rustling. Dane Mead House was her next step. The Bantrys had left after Mr. Bantry's death, and the mansion now belonged to Mrs. Lila Trent, a young widow who'd moved in last year. Miss Marple didn't know her well, but Lila was kind if nervous and might let her poke around. The house could hold Clusie Liza's old room, the stables, the riverbank. Miss Marple tucked the diary into her knitting bag, its weight a reminder of Eliza's story. She'd start with Leela, then track down anyone from 1955 still in St. Mary Mead. The morning was bright, the village sparkling after the rain. Miss Marple pulled on her sturdy coat and hat, her cane tapping as she stepped outside. St. Mary Mead was quiet, its cottages neat, and its gardens blooming. The path to Dane Mead wound past the church and the green, where children played and old Mrs. Price swept her bakery steps. Miss Marple nodded to her, ignoring the curious stare. The village loved gossip, and Eliza's story was a faded tale, whispered over tea. Miss Marple didn't trust rumors, but they could point to truth. Like a bent weather vane, Dane Mead House loomed at the village edge, its stone walls grand but weathered. Ivy clung to the towers, and the gardens were wild, roses tangling with weeds. Miss Marple climbed the steps, her cane steady, and rang the bell. The door creaked open, and Mrs. Lila Trent appeared, her dark hair loose and her eyes bright but wary. She was young, maybe 30, in a simple blue dress, her hands twisting a scarf. "Miss Marple," she said, her voice warm but nervous. "A surprise. Come in, please." Miss Marple smiled, her eyes sharp. "Thank you, Lila. I hope I'm not troubling you." She stepped into the hall, its wood floors polished but its chandelier dusty. The air smelled of old books and lavender, a mix of grandeur and neglect. Leela led her to a sunny parlor where a tea tray waited. "No trouble at all," she said, pouring tea with shaky hands. "What brings you here?" Her eyes flicked too. Miss Marple's knitting bag, curious. Miss Marple sipped her tea, the cup warm. "I've been sorting old things and found a diary from 1955. It's about Eliza Gray, the maid who disappeared from this house. I'd like to look into it, if you don't mind." Leela's face paled, her scarf slipping. "Eliza Gray. Heard the Story Village talk, you know. They say she ran off. Was there more to it?" Her voice was soft, her eyes wide. Miss Marple nodded, her face kind but firm. "I think so. My diary has notes, things I noticed back then. Eliza was scared and her shawl had a stain, maybe blood. I'd like to see the house, maybe her old room, to jog my memory." Lila hesitated, then nodded. "Of course. The house is big, and I haven't touched the attic rooms. That's where the maid stayed, I think. You're welcome to look." She stood, her hand still twisting the scarf. "It's a bit creepy, though. This place feels heavy sometimes." Miss Marple's needles clicked in her bag, a steady rhythm. "Old houses hold stories, Lila. I'm used to them." She followed Lila up a wide staircase, the wood creaking underfoot. The air grew cooler as they climbed, the light dimmer. The attic was a maze of narrow halls and locked doors, its windows small and streaked with grime. Lila unlocked a door, revealing a dusty room with a single bed, a cracked mirror, and a wooden trunk. "This was a maid's room," Lila said, her voice low. "Maybe Eliza's. I haven't touched it." Miss Marple stepped inside, her cane tapping. The room smelled of dust and time, its walls bare but marked with faint scratches, like someone had carved initials. She opened the trunk, its hinges groaning, and found old clothes and apron, faded but whole, with a dark stain on the hem. She bent closer, her eyes narrowing. The stain was brown, flaking like dried blood. Her heart quickened, but her face stayed calm. She pulled a thread from the apron, tucking it into her handkerchief. "This might help," she said, her voice soft. Lila shivered, her eyes on the apron. "Is that blood?" "Oh, Miss Marple, what happened to her?" Miss Marple patted her arm, her smile gentle. "I don't know yet, but I'll find out. May I take this thread?" "It's a small thing, but small things matter." Lila nodded, her face pale. "Take anything you need. I want to know too." She led Miss Marple downstairs, her steps quick, like she was eager to leave the attic. Back in the parlor, Miss Marple sipped more tea, her mind racing. The apron's stain matched the shawls in her diary, a clue the police had ignored. Eliza hadn't run, she'd been hurt, maybe worse. The locket, the argument, Mr. Cobb's digging, they were pieces of a puzzle, and Dane Mead House was the board. Miss Marple thought of the party guests. Mr. Bantry, angry by the stables. Dr. Finch, too friendly with Eliza. Mr. Cobb, quiet and watchful. Someone knew what happened, and some might still be in St. Mary Mead. She stood, her cane tapping. "Thank you, Leela. I'll come back if I need to look again. If you hear anything about Elisa Village talk, old stories, let me know." Lila nodded, her scarf tight in her hands. "I will. Be careful, Miss Marple. This feels bigger than a runaway." Miss Marple smiled, her eyes sharp. "I'm always careful, dear." She left her knitting bag heavy with the diary and the thread. The path back to her cottage was quiet, the village settling into evening. She thought of Eliza, her shy smile and trembling hands. The diary was her voice, and Miss Marple was her listener. The truth was out there, hidden in the shadows of Dane Mead, and she'd find it, one stitch at a time. Chapter 3. Return to Dane Mead. The morning sun shone bright over St. Mary Mead, drying the last of the rain from the village's cobblestone paths. Miss Jane Marple sat in her cottage, her knitting needles clicking as she finished a row of her gray scarf. The leather diary from 1955 lay open on the table, its pages filled with notes about Eliza Gray, the young maid who vanished from Dane Mead House after a summer party. Police had called her a runaway, but Miss Marple's entries detailing Eliza's fear, a missing locket, a stained shawl, and an overheard argument pointed to foul play. Yesterday, she'd found a stained apron in Dane Mead's attic, its dark mark like blood, a clue that echoed the diary's suspicions. Today, she'd returned to the mansion, determined to uncover more. Miss Marple sipped her tea, the cup warm in her hands, and reread the diary's key points. Lisa, 19 and shy, had worked for the Bantry family, serving at their grand party in 1955. Miss Marple, a guest, had noticed her trembling hands and fear of Mr. Cobb. The gardener, Hood, been digging by the riverbank that night? The diary mentioned a heart-shaped locket with a rose engraving. Gone when Eliza's shawl was found, stained with what Miss Marple believed was blood. An argument between Mr. Bantry and an unknown man by the stables had caught her ear, its tone sharp and secret. The police ignored these details, but the apron stain found yesterday was new proof Eliza hadn't run. She'd been hurt, maybe worse. She tucked the diary and the apron's thread into her knitting bag. Its weight a reminder of her promise to Eliza. Dane Mead House, now owned by Mrs. Lila Trent, held more secrets. Miss Marple was sure. Lila, a nervous young widow, had let her search the attic yesterday. And Miss Marple hoped to explore further the stables, the riverbank, maybe the gardens. She pulled on her black coat and hat, her cane tapping as she stepped outside. The village was lively, with children playing on the green and Mrs. Price sweeping her bakery steps. Miss Marple nodded to her, ignoring the curious glance. St. Mary Mead loved its stories, and Eliza's was a ghost tale to some. But Miss Marple sought facts, not whispers. The path to Dane Mead House wound past the church, where bells chimed softly. The mansion stood tall, its stone walls grand but faded, ivy creeping up its towers. The gardens were wild, roses tangled with weeds, and the air smelled of damp earth. Miss Marple climbed the steps, her cane steady, and rang the bell. Lila Trent opened the door, her dark hair tied back, her blue dress simple but neat. Were bright but shadowed, like she hadn't slept. "Miss Marple, you're back," she said, her voice warm but shaky. "Come in, please." Miss Marple smiled, her eyes sharp. "Thank you, Lila. I hope I'm not a bother. I'd like to look around again, if you don't mind." She stepped into the hall, its chandelier dusty but grand, the wood floors gleaming. Lila led her to the parlor, where a tea tray waited. "No bother at all," she said, pouring tea with unsteady hands. "Did the apron help? That stain scared me." Her voice dropped, her fingers twisting a scarf. Miss Marple sipped her tea, the warmth soothing. "It's a start, Lila. The stain matches something in my diary from Eliza's shawl. I think she was hurt, not a runaway." "May I see the stables and the riverbank today?" "They were important in 1955. Lila's eyes widened, her scarf slipping. "The stables? They're old, falling apart. The riverbank's overgrown, but you can look. Do you think? Something happened there." Her voice was soft, her face pale. Miss Marple nodded, her face kind but firm. "I do. My diary mentions an argument by the stables and digging by the river. Small things, but they add up." She set her cup down, her knitting bag on her lap. "If you know any stories about Eliza, even gossip, it could help." Lila hesitated, then spoke. "I've heard bits from the village. They say Eliza was sweet but scared, always looking over her shoulder. Some think she met a man, maybe a lover, and ran off. Others say the house is haunted, that she's still here." She shivered, her eyes on the window. "I don't believe in ghosts, but this place feels heavy." Miss Marple's needles clicked, a steady rhythm. "Houses hold memories, Lila, not ghosts. I'll find the truth." She stood, her cane tapping. "Let's start with the stables." Lila led her outside, through the wild gardens to a crumbling stable block, its wood gray and splintered. The air smelled of hay and damp, and the doors creaked as Lila pushed them open. Inside, stalls stood empty, cobwebs draping the beams. Miss Marple's eyes scanned the floor, spotting a rusty nail jutting from a post. Caught on, it was a scrap of cloth, faded but soft, like Eliza's shawl. She bent closer, her heart quickening. The cloth had a faint smell of oil, like lamp fuel, sharp and old. She tucked it into her handkerchief, her mind racing. The diary mentioned an argument here, and this cloth could tie Eliza to it. "Lila, look at this," Miss Marple said, holding up the cloth. "It's like Eliza's shawl. And this smell, oil, maybe from a lamp. Was there a lamp here in 1955? Lila frowned, her scarf tight in her hands. "I don't know. The Bantrys might have used lamps for the party outside. Is it important?" Her voice was shaky, her eyes on the cloth. Miss Marple nodded, her face calm. "It might be. Arguments in the dark need light, and oil spills easily." She moved to the loft, climbing a rickety ladder with care. The loft was dusty, filled with old crates and straw. Her eyes caught a glint of broken glass vial, half buried in the straw, its edges stained brown. She didn't touch it, but noted its place. It looked like a medicine vial, the kind a doctor might carry. Her diary had mentioned Dr. Finch, too friendly with Eliza. Was this his? She climbed down, her cane tapping. "Lila, I'd like to see the riverbank now. My diary says Mr. Cobb was digging there the night Eliza vanished." Lila led her through the gardens, past tangled roses, to the riverbank. The water was slow and green, its banks thick with reeds and mud. Bushes lined the edge, their roots gnarled. Miss Marple's eyes scanned the ground, spotting a patch of disturbed earth, newer than the rest, like someone had dug recently. Her heart beat faster, but her face stayed calm. "Lila, has anyone been here? Gardeners, maybe?" Lila shook her head, her eyes wide. "No, not since I moved in. The gardens are too wild. Do you think it's connected?" Her voice was Barely a whisper, Miss Marple nodded, her needles clicking in her bag. Maybe Mr. Cobb was here that night and he's still in the village. I'll talk to him next. She marked the spot in her mind, a clue to revisit. The cloth, the vial, the disturbed earth, they were threads. And Dame Mead was weaving them together. Back in the parlor, Lila poured more tea, her hands steadier. Miss Marple, you're so calm. Aren't you scared? Digging up the past like this? Her eyes were curious, her scarf loose now. Miss Marple smiled, her eyes sharp. The past isn't scary, Lila. It's just a puzzle, and I like puzzles. Thank you for letting me look. I'll be back if I need more. Lila nodded, her face softer. Anytime. I want to know what happened to Eliza. It's like she's still here, waiting. Her voice was quiet, her eyes on the window. Miss Marple stood, her cane tapping. She is, in a way. I'll find her story. She left her knitting bag heavy with the diary, the thread, and the cloth. The village was settling into noon, the green busy with carts and chatter. She thought of Mr. Cobb, the gardener, now old and living by the village edge. Her diary marked him as suspicious, his digging, his silence, Eliza's fear. The oil-soaked cloth and the disturbed earth pointed to him, too. She'd visit him tomorrow, her questions ready. As she walked home, her cane tapped a steady rhythm. Eliza's face, shy and scared, filled her mind. The locket, the argument, the stains, they were clues, small but loud. Dame Mead house was talking, its walls whispering of 1955. Miss Marple's needles clicked in her mind, stitching the past to the present. The truth was close, and she'd find it, one careful stitch at a time. Chapter 4. The gardener's shadow. The morning mist hung low over St. Mary Mead, softening the village's neat cottages and quiet paths. Miss Jane Marple sat in her cozy cottage, her knitting needles clicking as she worked on her gray scarf. The fire crackled, casting a warm glow. But her sharp blue eyes were on the leather diary from 1955, open on the table. Its pages held the story of Eliza Gray, a young maid who vanished from Dame Mead house after a summer party. The police had called her a runaway, but Miss Marple's notes about Eliza's fear. A missing locket, a stained shawl, and an overheard argument pointed to foul play. Her recent fine-zan apron with a blood-like stain, an oil-soaked cloth from the stables, and disturbed earth by the riverbank made the case feel alive, like a puzzle begging to be solved. Miss Marple sipped her tea, the cup warm in her hands, and reread the diary's key clues. Eliza, shy and 19, had worked for the Bantry family, trembling at the 1955 party as she served drinks. The diary noted her fear of Mr. Cobb, the gardener, who'd been digging by the riverbank that night. A heart-shaped locket with a rose, engraving, always on Eliza's neck, was missing when her shawl was found, stained with what Miss Marple believed was blood. An argument by the stables, Mr. Bantry's voice sharp against an unknown man's, had caught her ear. Yesterday at Dame Mead, the apron's stain, the oily cloth, and the riverbank's fresh earth had deepened her suspicions. Today, she'd tracked down Mr. Cobb, whose silence and digging made him a shadow in Eliza's story. She tucked the diary, the apron's thread, and the oily cloth into her knitting bag, its weight a reminder of her promise to Eliza. Mr. Cobb, now old and retired, lived in a small cottage by the village edge. Her diary marked him as suspicious, his late-night digging, his gruff manner, Eliza's fear. The disturbed earth by the riverbank, newer than the surrounding soil, suggested he was still hiding something. Miss Marple pulled on her black coat and hat, her cane tapping as she stepped outside. The mist was lifting and St. Mary Mead sparkled, its green busy with early shoppers. She nodded to Mrs. Price at the bakery, ignoring her curious stare. The village loved its tales, but Miss Marple sought truth, not gossip. The path to Cobb's cottage was narrow, winding past fields and a small brook. His home was a squat stone building, its garden tidy but plain, with a locked shed in the back. Miss Marple knocked, her cane steady, and the door creaked open. Mr. Cobb stood there, grizzled and broad, his hands rough from years of digging. His eyes, small and sharp, narrowed at her. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice gruff. "What do you want?" He stepped aside, letting her in. The cottage was dim, smelling of earth and tobacco. A single chair sat by a small fire, and tools hung on the walls. Miss Marple sat her knitting bag on her lap, her smile kind but her eyes piercing. "Good morning, Mr. Cobb. I'm looking into Eliza Gray's disappearance from 1955. You worked at Dane Mead. Then I'd like your help." Cobb's face hardened, his hands clenching. "Eliza, that girl ran off. Everyone knows it. Flighty thing, always dreaming of London." He turned to the fire, poking it roughly, but his shoulders were stiff. Miss Marple's needles clicked, a steady rhythm. "Maybe, but my diary from that year says Eliza was scared, especially of you. She disappeared after the party, and you were digging by the riverbank that night." "Why?" Cobb's poker froze, his eyes darting to her. "Scared of me? Nonsense. I dug to fix a fence, that's all. Party kept me up late. Guests trampling my beds." His voice was sharp, but his hands shook, and he glanced at the shed outside. Miss Marple nodded, her face calm. "Of course. But her locket was missing, a heart with a rose. Did you ever see it?" She watched his face, noting the flicker in his eyes, like a curtain twitching. Cobb shrugged, his voice flat. "Locket? Never noticed. She was just a maid, always fussing with her apron." He stood, his hands in his pockets, and moved to the door. "I've got work, Miss Marple. That's all I know." Miss Marple stood, her cane tapping. "Think. You, Mr. Cobb? If you remember anything, let me know." Small things matter. She left her knitting bag heavy, her mind racing. Cobb's unease, his glance at the shed, his shaky hands, they screamed guilt. The diary's note about his digging, the fresh earth by the riverbank. And now his lie about the locket, all pointed to a secret. She needed to know what was in that shed. Back in the village, Miss Marple stopped at the grocer's, where Tommy, the delivery boy, was stacking apples. He was a bright lad, 16 and eager for adventure, always trailing her for stories. "Tommy," she said, her voice low, "I need a favor. Can you watch Mr. Cobb's shed tonight? Don't go in. Just see if he does anything odd. Be careful." Tommy's eyes lit up, his grin wide, like a detective. "Miss Marple, I'm on it. I'll hide by the brook, quiet as a mouse." He saluted, his cap slipping. Miss Marple smiled, her eyes sharp. "Good boy. Tell me tomorrow, but don't get caught." She handed him a penny, her heart warm but her mind focused. Tommy's youth made him invisible, perfect for watching Cobb at her cottage. Miss Marple sat by the fire, the diary open. She reread the entry about the party, picturing Eliza's trembling hands. Cobb's shadow by the river, the argument by the stables. The oily cloth from yesterday, smelling like lamp fuel, was a new thread. Had Cobb used a lamp that night, digging in the dark? The apron stain, the shawl's blood, the missing locket, they were pieces of a story, and Cobb was a key character. Her needles clicked faster, her mind weaving the clues. The vial in the stable loft, possibly Dr. Finch's, nagged at her. Finch had been too friendly with Eliza, the diary said, and the vial's brown stain could mean medicine or poison. She stood, her cane tapping, and walked to her window. The village was settling into evening, the green empty and the cottages glowing with lamplight. St. Mary Mead held Eliza's secret, buried but not gone. Miss Marple thought of Mrs. Trent, nervous but helpful, and Mrs. Bantry, who might still be alive, her memory a treasure. She'd visit the jeweler tomorrow to ask about the locket's buyer and check on Mrs. Bantry's whereabouts. Huck was hiding something, but he wasn't the only one. The argument, the locket, the oil, they pointed to a bigger web, and Dane Mead was its center. Miss Marple sat again, her knitting in her lap. The fire popped and her needles clicked, a rhythm that steadied her thoughts. Tommy's report would come tomorrow, and it might crack Cobb's shell. The diary was her guide, its pages a map to 1955. Eliza's face, shy and scared, filled her. Mind, she hadn't run, she'd been silenced, and someone at that party knew why. The truth was close, like a knot in her wool, and Miss Marple would untangle it, one careful stitch at a time. Chapter 5. The locket's clue. The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains of Miss Jane Marple's cottage in St. Mary Mead, casting soft patterns on the wooden floor. She sat by the fire, her knitting needles clicking as she worked her gray scarf, but her sharp blue eyes were on the leather diary from 1955 open on the table. Its pages held the mystery of Eliza Gray, a young maid who vanished from Dane Mead House after a summer party. The police had dismissed her as a runaway. But Miss Marple's notes detailing Eliza's fear, a missing locket, a stained shawl, and an overheard argument pointed to foul play. Her recent finds: an apron with a blood-like stain and oil-soaked, cloth from the stables, disturbed earth by the riverbank. And Mr. Cobb's nervous lies made the case feel urgent. Like a puzzle with pieces snapping into place, Miss Marple sipped her tea, the cup warm in her hands, and reread the diaries. Key clues. Eliza, 19 and shy, had trembled at the 1955 party, scared of Mr. Cobb, the gardener, who'd been digging by the riverbank. Her heart-shaped locket with a rose engraving, always worn, was missing when her shawl was found, stained with what Miss Marple believed was blood. An argument by the stables. Mr. Bantry's voice, sharp against an unknown man's, had caught her ear. The aprons, stained from Dane Mead's attic. The oily cloth smelling of lamp fuel. And the fresh earth by the river suggested Cobb was hiding something. Yesterday she'd asked Tommy, the grocer's boy, to watch Cobb's shed, and his report could be the key to cracking the gardener's secret. She tucked the diary, the apron's thread, and the oily cloth into her knitting bag. Its weight a reminder of Eliza's story. Tommy had slipped a note under her door at dawn, his scrawl messy but clear. Cobb went to his shed at midnight, took a spade, and headed to the riverbank. Dug for an hour, then left. Spade's gone now. Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her face stayed calm. Cobb's midnight digging so soon after her questions screamed guilt. The disturbed earth by the riverbank. The diary's note about his late-night work in 1955, it all pointed to a buried secret. Maybe the locket, or worse. Today, she'd visit the village jeweler to trace the locket's buyer and return to Dane Mead to search the stables again. Where the oily cloth and a mysterious vial hinted at more, Miss Marple pulled on her black coat and hat, her cane tapping. As she stepped outside, St. Mary Mead was waking, its cottages glowing in the sun, the green busy with early chatter. She passed Mrs. Price at the bakery, nodding but dodging her questions. The village loved Eliza's tale, now a ghost story, but Miss Marple sought facts. The jeweler's shop, a tiny place with a bell over the door, was her first stop. Mr. Hale, old and spectacled, stood behind the counter polishing a ring. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice warm. "What brings you here?" She smiled, her eyes sharp. "I'm looking into Eliza Gray's disappearance from 1955. My diary mentions a locket she wore, heart-shaped with a rose engraving. Did you sell one like that?" Mr. Hale rubbed his chin, his eyes distant. "Eliza Gray. Poor girl. Yes, I remember a locket like that. Sold it to a man not long before she vanished. He didn't give his name, paid in cash, said it was a gift. For someone special." He frowned, his hands still. "Could have been for Eliza, I suppose? Sorry, that's all I know." Miss Marple nodded, her needles clicking in her bag. "That's helpful, Mr. Hale. If you remember anything else, let me know." She left, her mind racing. A man buying the locket was a new thread, possibly the unknown voice in the stable's argument. Mr. Bantry, Dr. Finch, noted in the diary for his odd behavior. Or someone else. The oily cloth and the vial in the stable loft nagged at Hershey. Needed to check them again. The path to Mead House was quiet, winding past the church's soft bells. The mansion loomed, its stone walls grand but worn, ivy tangling its towers. Miss Marple rang the bell, and Mrs. Lila Trent opened the door, her dark hair loose, her blue dress neat but her eyes tired. "Miss Marple, you're back," she said, her voice shaky but kind. "Any news?" Miss Marple stepped into the hall, its chandelier dusty. "A little, Lila. I'd like to see the stables again, if you don't mind. Something I found there might help." Lila nodded, her hands twisting. "A scarf. Of course, the stables are creepy, but go ahead. Want me to come?" Her eyes flicked to the window. Nervous, Miss Marple smiled, her face calm. "I'll manage, but thank you. If you hear any village talk about Eliza, let me know." Lila led her through the wild gardens where roses fought weeds to the crumbling stable block. The air smelled of damp wood and hay, and the doors creaked open. Miss Marple's eyes scanned the stalls, returning to the rusty nail where she'd found the oily cloth. She climbed the rickety loft ladder, her cane hooked on her arm, and knelt by the straw where the glass vial lay, its brown stain glinting. It looked medical, like a doctor's tool. And the diary's note about Dr. Finch's friendliness with Eliza flashed in her mind. She didn't touch the vial, but noted its shape small, with a cracked cork, the stain like dried medicine or poison. The oily cloth, smelling of lamp fuel, suggested a struggle in the dark, maybe lit by a lamp. Miss Marple's heart beat faster, but her face stayed calm. She climbed down, her cane tapping, and checked the stable floor, finding a faint scuff in the dirt, like something heavy had been dragged. "Lila," she called. "Did anyone use the stables after the Bantrys left?" Lila, waiting outside, shook her head. "Not that I know. They've been empty since I moved in." "Why?" Her voice was soft, her scarf tight in her hands. Miss Marple pointed to the scuff. "This mark is old, but not that old. Something happened here. Maybe the night Eliza vanished." She tucked the thought away, her mind weaving the clues. The vial, the cloth, the scuff, they pointed to the stables as a key scene. Maybe where Eliza's fate was sealed, back in the parlor, Lila poured tea, her hands steadier. "Miss Marple, you're so sure. How do you see these things?" Eyes were curious, her face softer. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her needles clicking. "People leave traces, Lila, like crumbs. I just follow them." "Thank you for letting me look. I'll check the riverbank another day." She stood, her cane tapping, her knitting bag heavy with the diary and clues. Lila's help was vital, but her nervousness hinted at Annie's maybe the house's weight. Maybe more. As Miss Marple walked home, the village was busy, carts rattling and children laughing. She thought of Tommy's note cob's midnight digging, the missing spade, the disturbed earth by the riverbank, the diary's note about his 1955 work. His lie about the locket all marked him as guilty. But the vial and the lockets. Byers suggested others were involved. Dr. Finch, with his odd behavior, could tie to the vial. Mr. Bantry's argument, sharp and secret, might link to the oily cloth. She needed to find Mrs. Bantry if she was alive, and ask about that night. At her cottage, Miss Marple sat by the fire, the diary open. She sketched the vial's shape next to the locket's drawing, her hands steady. The clues were piling up: the apron stain, the shawl's blood, the oily cloth, the vial, the disturbed earth, Cobb's lies. Eliza's fear, her locket, the arguments, they were threads, and the stables were a knot. Her needles clicked faster, her mind racing. Tommy's report confirmed Cobb's panic. But the locket's buyer and the vial's owner were shadows waiting to be lit. She stood, her cane tapping, and looked out her window. St. Mary Mead glowed in the afternoon sun, its peace a mask for old secrets. Eliza's face, shy and scared, filled her mind. The truth was close, like a stitch ready to be tied off. Miss Marple would visit Mrs. Bantry tomorrow if she could find her, and plan a way to confront Cobb. The diary was her guide, and her sharp eyes would do the rest, one careful stitch at a time. Chapter 6. The Party's Secrets. The afternoon sun bathed St. Mary Mead in a golden glow, softening the village's neat cottages and quiet paths. Miss Jane Marple sat in her cozy cottage, her knitting needles clicking as she worked her gray scarf, the fire crackling softly. The leather diary from 1955 lay open on the table, its pages alive with the mystery of Eliza Gray, a young maid who vanished from Dane Mead House after a summer party. The police had called her a runaway, but Miss Marple's notes detailing Eliza's fear, a missing locket, a stained shawl, and an overheard argument pointed to foul play. Her recent finds: an apron with a blood-like stain, an oil-soaked cloth, a medical vial, disturbed earth by the riverbank. And Mr. Cobb's midnight digging made the case urgent. A puzzle with pieces falling into place. Miss Marple sipped her tea, the cup warm, and reread the diary's key clues. Eliza, 19 and shy, had trembled at the 1955 party, scared of Mr. Cobb, the gardener, who'd dug by the riverbank that night. Her heart-shaped locket with a rose engraving, always worn, was gone when her shawl was found, stained with what Miss Marple believed was blood. An argument by the stables, Mr. Bantry's sharp voice against an unknown man's, had caught her ear. The apron stain from Dane Mead's attic, the oily cloth and vial from the stables, the fresh earth by the river, and Cobb's lies about the locket all screamed secrets. Tommy's note about Cobb's midnight digging confirmed his guilt, but the locket's anonymous buyer and the vial's link to Dr. Finch suggested a wider web. Today Miss Marple would dig into the party's secrets, starting with Mrs. Bantry and Mrs. Trent. She tucked the diary, the apron's thread, and the oily cloth into her knitting bag, its weight a promise to Eliza. Mrs. Bantry, now widowed, lived in a smaller house in the village, her memory a potential gold mine. Mrs. Trent, Dane Mead's current owner, had been helpful but nervous, and Miss Marple hoped to coax more from her. She pulled on her black coat and hat, her cane tapping as she stepped outside. St. Mary Mead was bustling with carts on the green and children chasing a ball. She nodded to Mrs. Price at the bakery, dodging her questions. The village whispered of Eliza's ghost, but Miss Marple chased facts, not tales. First, she visited Mrs. Trent at Dane Mead House, the mansion's stone walls grand but worn, ivy clinging to its towers. Lila Trent opened the door, her dark hair tied back, her blue dress neat but her eyes tired. "Miss Marple, welcome," she said, her voice warm but shaky. "Any news about Eliza?" Her hands twisted a scarf, her face pale. Miss Marple stepped into the hall, its chandelier dusty. "I'm getting closer, Lila. I'd like to talk about the party in 1955. You weren't here then, but you've heard stories. And I have something to show you." She followed Lila to the parlor, where a tea tray waited, the air smelling of lavender. Lila poured tea, her hands unsteady. "I've heard bits village gossip, mostly. They say Eliza was sweet, scared, maybe in love. Some think she ran off with a man. Others say she's a ghost here." She shivered, her scarf slipping. "What did you find?" Miss Marple pulled the oily cloth from her bag. Its lamp fuel smell sharp. "This from the stables, and a vial, maybe medical. My diary mentions an argument there, and Eliza's fear of Mr. Cobb. Have you found anything in the house letters? Keepsakes, that might help." Leela's eyes widened, her cup clattering. "A letter. I found it in the attic, tucked in a floorboard. I forgot until now it's signed AG. I'll get it." She hurried upstairs, returning with a yellowed note, its ink faded but clear. It read, "Meet me by the oak. Midnight, please. E.g. The paper smelled faintly of oil. Like the cloth. Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her face stayed calm. "This is important, Lila. The oak is by the riverbank, where Cobb was digging. I keep it." Lila nodded, and Miss Marple tucked the letter into her bag, her mind racing. Eliza had planned a secret meeting, but with whom? The oily smell linked it to the stables, maybe to the argument or the vial. She sipped her tea, her needles clicking. Lila, you've been a great help. If you hear more gossip, anything, tell me. Small things matter. Lila nodded. Her face softer but still nervous, and Miss Marple left her cane tapping. The letter was a new thread, tying Eliza to the riverbank and the stables. She needed Mrs. Bantry's memory to weave it further. Mrs. Bantry's house was a neat cottage near the church, its garden tidy with roses. Miss Marple knocked, and Mrs. Bantry, frail but sharp-edged, opened the door. Her white hair was pinned up, her dress old but elegant. "Jane Marple," she said, her voice strong. "Come in, dear. Tea." She led Miss Marple to a sunny sitting room where photos of Dame Mead hung on the walls. Miss Marple sat, her knitting bag on her lap. "Dolly, I'm looking into Eliza Gray's disappearance from your 1955 party. My diary has notes, but I need your memory." "What do you remember?" Mrs. Bantry's eyes clouded, her hands folding. "Eliza. Poor girl. She was quiet, good at her work, but nervous that night, dropping a tray once. I saw her serving drinks, jumpy around a guest Dr. Finch. I think he was always charming, but too forward with her." She frowned, her voice low. "After she vanished, the police said she ran off, but I never believed it. Her shawl by the river, it wasn't right." Miss Marple's needles clicked, her eyes sharp. "Dr. Finch. My diary notes his odd behavior, lingering by the stables. Did you see him there or hear an argument?" Mrs. Bantry nodded, her face tight. "Yes, I saw him near the stables, talking to someone, couldn't see who. And I heard raised voices later, maybe Mr. Bantry's. But it was dark, hard to tell. The party was loud, lanterns everywhere. Eliza was gone by morning." Her voice broke, her hands trembling. Miss Marple leaned forward, her voice soft. "Dolly, this helps. Did Eliza ever mention a locket or meeting someone by the oak tree?" Mrs. Bantry shook her head. "No, but she wore a locket, always touching it. I thought it was from a sweetheart. The oak, that's by the river, near Cobb's gardening spot. It was always digging there." Her eyes narrowed, her memory sharp. "Miss Marple nodded, her heart racing. "Thank you, Dolly. If you remember more, let me know." She stood, her cane tapping, her mind weaving the clues. Mrs. Bantry's memory matched the diary Finch by the stables. An argument, Cobb's digging. The letters, oak tree meeting, its oily smell. Linked Eliza to the riverbank, and the stables clues, the cloth, the vial, the scuff mark. Back at her cottage, Miss Marple sat by the fire, the diary open. She added the letters' details, sketching the oak tree beside the locket and vial. The clues were piling up. The apron's stain, the shawl's blood, the oily cloth, the vial. The disturbed earth, Cobb's lies, the letter's plea. Eliza's fear, her locket, the argument they were threads, and the party was the knot. Tommy's report of Cobb's digging, Mrs. Bantry's memory of Finch. Lila's letter, they pointed to a secret meeting gone wrong. She stood, her cane tapping, and looked out her window. St. Mary Mead was settling into dusk, its peace hiding old wounds. Eliza's face, shy and scared, filled her mind. The oak tree, the stables, the riverbank, they were stages in her story, and someone Cobb. Finch or another knew the ending. Miss Marple would plan a trap, maybe using the locket as bait, to flush out the truth. Her needles clicked, a rhythm that steadied her thoughts. The diary was her guide, and her sharp eyes would find the truth, one careful stitch at a time. Chapter 7. The trap by the oak. The evening shadows stretched long over St. Mary Mead, cloaking the village in a quiet hush. Miss Jane Marple sat in her cozy cottage, the fire crackling softly, her knitting needles clicking as she worked her gray scarf. The leather diary from 1955 lay open on the table, its pages a map to the mystery of Eliza Gray, the young maid who vanished from Dane Mead House after a summer party. The police had dismissed her as a runaway, but Miss Marple's notes detailing Eliza's fear, a missing locket, a stained shawl, and an overheard argument pointed to foul play. Her recent finds an apron with a blood-like stain, an oil-soaked cloth, a medical vial, disturbed earth by the riverbank. Mr. Cobb's midnight digging and a letter signed E.G. made the case feel like a puzzle with its final pieces. Within reach, Miss Marple sipped her tea, the cup warm in her hands, and reread the diary's key clues. Eliza, 19 and shy, had trembled at the 1955 party, scared of Mr. Cobb, the gardener, who dug by the river bank that night. Her heart-shaped locket with a rose engraving, always worn, was missing when her shawl was found, stained with what Miss Marple believed was blood. An argument by the stables, Mr. Bantry's sharp voice against an unknown man's, had caught her ear, the apron stain from Dane Mead's attic, the oily cloth and vial from the stables, the fresh earth by the river, Cobb's lies about the locket, and the letter from Leila Trent begging someone to meet by the oak tree, all wove a web. Mrs. Bantry's memory of Dr. Finch's odd behavior and Tommy's report of Cobb's digging tightened the threads. Miss Marple needed to act, and a trap would flush out the truth. She tucked the diary, the apron's thread, the oily cloth, and the letter into her knitting bag. Its weight a promise to Eliza. Cobb's midnight digging, right after her questions, screamed guilt, and the letter's oak tree meeting pointed to the riverbank where he'd been. The oily cloth and vials suggested a struggle in the stables, possibly tied to Dr. Finch, whose friendliness with Eliza had raised flags. Miss Marple's plan was simple but bold: spread a rumor that a locket matching Eliza's had been found by the oak, and watch who came looking. Cobb was her target, but others might react, revealing their part in the web. She'd need Leila's help to watch, and Tommy's sharp eyes to spread the word. Miss Marple stood, her black coat and hat ready, her cane tapping as she stepped outside. The village was settling into dusk, its cottages glowing with lamplight, the green empty but for a stray cat. She walked to the grocer's, where Tommy was sweeping, his cap crooked. "Tommy," she said, her voice low, "I need you to do something important. Tell folks you heard a locket was found by the oak tree at Dane Mead, heart-shaped with a rose. Don't say who found it. Just let it spread. Can you do that?" Tommy's eyes lit up, his broom forgotten. "Like a secret mission, Miss Marple. I'll tell everyone, Mrs. Price, the postman, everybody. They'll be talking by supper." He grinned, his voice eager. Miss Marple smiled, her eyes sharp. "Good boy. Be quick, but don't mention me. Come to Dane Mead tonight near the oak. But stay hidden. I'll need your eyes." She handed him a penny, her heart warm but her mind focused. Tommy's chatter would light the fuse, and Cobb or someone else would feel the heat. Next, she visited Dane Mead House, the mansion's stone walls looming in the fading light, ivy tangling its towers. Leila Trent opened the door, her dark hair loose, her blue dress neat, but her eyes nervous. "Miss Marple, you're here late," she said, her voice shaky. "Is everything all right?" Miss Marple stepped into the hall, its chandelier dim. "I hope so, Leila. I've a plan to find Eliza's truth, but I need your help. Can we talk in the parlor?" Leila nodded, leading her to the sunny room where a tea tray waited, the air smelling of lavender. Leila poured tea, her hands twisting a scarf. "A plan for Eliza. What is it?" Her eyes flicked to Miss Marple's knitting bag, curious but wary. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her needles clicking. "I've asked a boy to spread a rumor that a locket like Eliza's was found by the oak tree where your letter pointed. I think someone, maybe Mr. Cobb, will go looking, scared it's evidence. Will you watch with me tonight near the oak? We'll stay hidden just to see." Leila's cup clattered, her face pale. "Watch. At night? Oh, Miss Marple, that's spooky. But if it helps Eliza, I'll do it. What if someone comes?" Her voice was soft, her scarf tight in her hands. Miss Marple's eyes were kind but firm. "We won't confront them, just watch. it's Cobb or someone else, their reaction will tell us plenty. Bring a shawl, it'll be cold. Lila nodded. Her face set, and Miss Marple felt a spark of pride. Lila's nerves hid courage, and she'd need it. Back at her cottage, Miss Marple prepared for the night, packing a flashlight and a fake Lockita cheap pendant from her jewelry box. Close, enough to fool in the dark. The diary sketch of Eliza's locket, heart-shaped with a rose, was clear in her mind. She reread the letter, its plea to meet by the oak, its oily smell linking it to the stable's cloth. The vial, possibly Finch's, and the argument. Possibly Bantry's wove a web, but Cobb's digging made him the loose thread to pull. Her needles clicked, her mind racing. The trap was set, and the oak tree would be the stage, as night fell. Miss Marple and Lila met by Dame Mead's gardens, the air cold and still. The oak tree, gnarled and tall, stood by the river bank, its branches casting shadows in the moonlight. Tommy hid nearby, his cap barely visible in the bushes. Miss Marple and Lila crouched behind a thick rose bush, their shawls tight, the fake locket in Miss Marple's pocket. Her cane rested against her knee, her knitting bag at her side. The river gurgled softly and the silence was heavy, like the village held its breath. At midnight, a twig snapped. Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her face stayed calm. A figure emerged from the shadows, Mr. Cobb, his grizzled face tense, a spade in his hands. He moved to the oak, his eyes darting, and began to dig. The spade scraped loud in the quiet. Lila gasped, her hand on Miss Marple's arm, but Miss Marple's eyes were locked on Cobb. Noting his frantic pace, his muttered curses, she waited until he paused, his spade stuck in the earth, then stepped out, her cane tapping. "Looking for this, Mr. Cobb," she said, her voice clear, holding up the fake locket. The moonlight caught its cheap shine, and Cobb froze, his face pale, his spade dropping. "Miss Marple," he stammered, his hands shaking. Where'd you get that?" His eyes were wild, his voice rough. Miss Marple's eyes were steel, her smile calm. "Never mind that." "Why are you digging here, Mr. Cobb?" "The same spot you dug in 1955 when Eliza vanished." Cobb's shoulders slumped, his face gray. "Right," he said, his voice low. "I saw something that night. Eliza was arguing with Dr. Finch by the stables, upset, crying. Later, she was gone, and Finch paid me to keep quiet. Said she ran off, but I didn't believe him. He gave me her locket to bury, said it'd cause trouble." He pointed to the earth, his hands trembling. "It's there, under the oak. But I swear I didn't kill her." Lila gasped, her shawl slipping, and Tommy's eyes gleamed from the bushes. Miss Marple's heart raced, but her face stayed calm. "You hid evidence, Mr. Cobb. That's a crime. Dig it up and we'll talk to the police." Cobb nodded, his face broken, and began to dig again, slower now. Miss Marple stepped back, her needles clicking in her bag. The trap had worked, catching Cobb's confession, but Finch's role was new and dark. The locket, the vial, the oily cloth, they pointed to a struggle, maybe a crime in the stables. Her mind wove the clues: Eliza's fear, the letter's plea, Cobb's silence, Finch's payment. The riverbank, the oak, the stables, they were pieces of Eliza's last night. And the truth was close. She turned to Lila, her voice soft. "Go home, dear. I'll handle this with Tommy. You've been brave." Keela nodded, her face pale, and hurried off. Miss Marple waited as Cobb dug, the moonlight cold. The locket wasn't there yet, but Cobb's words were enough for now. The diary had led her here, and her sharp eyes would finish the job, one careful stitch at a time. Chapter 8. The doctor's lie. The morning sun rose gently over St. Mary Mead, painting the village's cottages in soft pinks and golds. Miss Jane Marple sat in her cozy cottage, the fire crackling low, her knitting needles clicking as she worked. Her gray scarf, the leather diary from 1955, lay open on the table. Pages, A Guide to the Mystery of Eliza Gray, the young maid who vanished from Dane Mead House after a summer party. The police had called her a runaway, but Miss Marple's. Notes detailing Eliza's fear, a missing locket, a stained shawl, and an overheard argument pointed to foul play. Her recent finds on apron with a blood-like stain, an oil-soaked cloth, a medical vial, disturbed earth by the riverbank, Mr. Cobb's midnight digging, and a letter signed E.G. had led to a trap last night, where Cobb confessed to hiding Eliza's locket for Dr. Finch. The case was close to solved. But Miss Marple needed to uncover Finch's role to tie up the truth. Miss Marple sipped her tea, the cup warm in her hands, and reread the diary's key clues. Eliza, 19 and shy, had trembled at the 1955 party, scared of Mr. Cobb, who dug by the riverbank that night. Her heart-shaped locket with a rose engraving, always worn, was missing when her shawl was found, stained with what Miss Marple believed was blood. An argument by the stables, Mr. Bantry's sharp voice against an unknown man's, had caught her ear. The apron stain from Dane Mead's attic, the oily cloth and vial from the stables, the fresh earth by the river, Cobb's lies, the letter begging for a meeting by the oak. And Mrs. Bantry's memory of Dr. Finch's odd behavior wove a tight web. Last night's trap, spreading a rumor of a found locket, had caught Cobb digging by the oak, where he admitted Finch paid him to bury the locket and stay silent about an argument he'd seen between Finch and Eliza. Finch, now dead, was the key, and Miss Marple needed proof of his guilt. She tucked the diary, the apron's thread, the oily cloth, and the letter into her knitting bag. Its weight a promise to Eliza. Cobb's confession was a breakthrough, but the locket wasn't found his. Digging had stopped when she confronted him. The oily cloth and vial from the stables, the letter's oily smell, and the diary's note about Finch's friendliness suggested he'd lured Eliza to a dangerous meeting. Miss Marple's mind turned to Finch's old office, now a shop, where records might hide. She had a brass key from another case kept in her drawer that might fit a lock there. Today she'd search with Lila Trent's help and confront Cobb again, to confirm his story and find the locket. Miss Marple stood, her black coat and hat ready, her cane tapping as she stepped outside. St. Mary Mead was waking, its green busy with early carts and chatter. She passed Mrs. Price at the bakery, nodding but avoiding questions. The village buzzed with Tommy's rumor about the locket, and Miss Marple hoped it kept Cobb nervous. First, she visited Dane Mead House, its stone walls grand but worn ivy, tangling its towers. Lila Trent opened the door, her dark hair loose, her blue dress neat, but her eyes wide. "Miss Marple, after last night, did it work?" she asked, her voice shaky. Miss Marple stepped into the hall, its chandelier dim. "It did, Lila." Cobb confessed to hiding Eliza's locket for Dr. Finch, who argued with her that night. "I need to search Finch's old office, now the Drapers' shop. Will you come? And can we talk to Cobb later?" Lila's scarf slipped, her face pale. "Dr. Finch, that's awful." "Yes, I'll help. The shop's not far. Cobb's still in the village, I think." She grabbed a shawl, her hands trembling but her nod firm. Miss Marple smiled, her eyes sharp. "You're brave, Lila. Let's go." They walked to the village center where the draper's shop stood, its windows full of fabrics. Once Dr. Finch's office, it still had his old cabinets in the back, the shopkeeper said. Miss Marple asked to look, her voice kind but firm, and the shopkeeper, a young man, shrugged and let them. The back room was dusty, its cabinets locked, their wood scratched from years. Miss Marple pulled the brass key from her bag, its weight familiar. It slid into a cabinet lock, turning with a soft click. Inside was a metal box, its lid tight. The key didn't fit, but Lila found a hairpin, and Miss Marple, with steady hands, picked the lock-a-skill from her youth. The box opened, revealing a journal in Finch's tight handwriting, a few vials like the one in the stables, and a faded photo of Eliza, her shy smile clear. Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her face stayed calm. She opened the journal, scanning. Entries from 1955. One read, Eliza grows difficult, too scared. Must fix this mistake. Another, dated the party night, said, met her by stables, argued. She fell, hit her head. Hit her by the river. Cobb will stay quiet for coin. Her needles clicked, her mind racing. Finch had killed Elisa, maybe by accident, and covered it up. Lila, look, Miss Marple said, showing the journal. Finch admits it. He hurt Eliza, hit her body, and paid Cobb to bury the locket. Lila gasped, her shawl slipping, her eyes wet. Miss Marple tucked the journal into her bag, leaving the vials and photos for the police. The oily cloth, the vial, the letters smell, they matched Finch's crime. A struggle in the stables, lit by a lamp. They left the shop, Lila shaky but quiet. Miss Marple's next stop was Cobb's cottage to confirm his story and find the locket. The path was narrow, the air cool. Cobb's stone cottage stood by the village edge, its garden tidy, the shed locked. Miss Marple knocked and Cobb opened the door, his grizzled face gray, his eyes wary. You again, he growled, stepping aside. What now? Miss Marple sat in his dim room, her knitting bag on her lap, her eyes piercing. Mr. Cobb, I found Dr. Finch's journal. He says you took money to hide Eliza's locket and keep quiet about her death. Tell me the truth and where the locket is. Cobb's hands shook, his face crumbling. All right, I'm done lying. Finch came to me that night, panicked. Said Eliza fell, hit her head, died. He hid her by the river, told me to bury her locket under the oak so no one to ask questions. Gave me 10 pounds. His voice broke, his eyes on the floor. I dug last night to find it, but it's deep. I didn't kill her, I swear. Marple's needles clicked, her voice calm. I believe you didn't kill her, but you hid a crime. We're exactly under the oak. Cobb described a spot by the tree's roots, marked by a flat stone. She nodded, her heart heavy, but her mind clear. The police will want that locket and your story. Come with us to Mead tomorrow. Cobb slumped, his face old. I'll come. I'm tired of this. Miss Marple stood, her cane tapping, Leela silent beside her. The journal, Cobb's confession, the clues they pinned Finch as Eliza's killer, with Cobb as his silent partner. The locket, still buried, was the final piece, proof of their crime. Back at her cottage, Miss Marple sat by the fire, the diary open, scattered Finch's journal entries, sketching the oak stone beside. The locket and vial. The clues fit. The apron stain, the shawl's blood, the oily cloth, the vial, the letter. The disturbed earth, Cobb's digging, Finch's confession, Lisa's fear, her locket, the argument they told her last night, a meeting with Finch that ended in death. Miss Marple's needles clicked, her mind steady. The riverbank, where Finch hid Eliza, needed searching, and the locket had to be found. She stood, her cane tapping, and looked out her window. St. Mary Mead glowed in the evening light, its peace, hiding old sins. Eliza's face, shy and scared, filled her mind. The truth was close, like a scarf nearly done. Tomorrow, she'd call the constable, search the riverbank, and dig for the locket with Cobb. The diary had led her here, and her sharp eyes would finish it, one careful stitch at a time. Chapter 9. The river's truth. The morning mist curled over St. Mary Mead, veiling the village's neat cottages in a soft haze. Miss Jane Marple sat in her cozy cottage, the fire crackling low, her knitting needles clicking as she worked her gray scarf. The leather diary from 1955 lay open on the table, its pages a roadmap to the mystery of Eliza Gray, the young maid who vanished from Mead House after a summer party. The police had called her a runaway, but Miss Marple's notes detailing Eliza's fear, a missing locket, a stained shawl, and an overheard argument pointed to foul play. Her recent finds on apron with a blood-like stain, an oil-soaked cloth, a medical vial, Disturbed earth by the riverbank. Mr. Cobb's midnight digging. A letter signed E.G. and Dr. Finch's journal had unraveled the truth. Cobb's confession and Finch's written admission pinned the doctor as Eliza's killer, with Cobb hiding the locket to cover it up. Today, Miss Marple would search the riverbank to find Eliza's remains and the locket, closing the case for good. Miss Marple sipped her tea, the cup warm in her hands, and reviewed the diary's key clues. Eliza, 19 and shy, had trembled at the 1955 party, scared of Mr. Cobb, who dug by the riverbank that night. Her heart-shaped locket with a rose engraving, always worn, was missing when her shawl was found, stained with what Miss Marple believed was blood. An argument by the stables. Mr. Bantry's sharp voice against an unknown man's had caught her ear. The apron stain from Dame Mead's attic, the oily cloth and vial from the stables, fresh earth by the river, Cobb's lies, the letter begging for a meeting by the oak. Mrs. Bantry's memory of Dr. Finch's odd behavior and Finch's journal confessing he killed Elisa in a struggle all wove a tight web. Cobb's admission that he buried the locket for Finch under the oak by a flat stone was the final thread. The riverbank, where Finch hid Eliza's body, is the last place to search. She tucked the diary, the apron's thread, the oily cloth, the letter, and Finch's journal into her knitting bag, its weight a promise to Elisa. Last night's trap. Spreading a rumor of a found locket had forced Cobb to confess, but the locket remained buried. Finch's journal, found in his old office, admitted he lured Eliza to the stables, argued, and killed her when she fell, hitting her head. He hid her by the river and paid Cobb to bury the locket. Miss Marple's mind was clear. The riverbank held Eliza's remains, and the oak held the locket. She'd called the village constable, Mr. Polk, to meet her at Dane Mead with Lila Trent, and Cobb to dig and search. The truth was close, and she'd lay it bare. Miss Marple stood, her black coat and hat ready, cane tapping as she stepped outside. St. Mary Mead was stirring, its green quiet but for a milk cart's rattle. She passed Mrs. Price at the bakery, nodding but dodging her gossip. The village buzzed with the locket rumor, and Miss Marple hoped it kept Cobb scared. She walked to Dane Mead House, its stone walls grand but worn, ivy tangling its towers. Lila Trent opened the door, her dark hair tied back, her blue dress neat, but her eyes nervous. "Miss Marple, is it time?" she asked, her voice shaky but firm. Miss Marple stepped into the hall, its chandelier dim. "Yes, Lila, the constable's coming, and Cobb will show us where he buried the locket. We'll search the riverbank for Eliza. Will you help?" Lila nodded, her scarf tight in her hands, and Miss Marple felt a spark of pride. Lila's courage was growing, vital for today's grim task. They met Constable Polk and Cobb by the oak tree, gnarled branches casting shadows over the riverbank. Polk, a sturdy man with a kind face, carried a spade, his notebook ready. Cobb, grizzled and gray, stood hunched, his eyes on the ground, his hands cuffed loosely. "Miss Marple," Polk said, tipping his hat, "you've stirred up a storm. Cobb says the locket's here. Let's see." Miss Marple pointed to the flat stone Cobb described, her voice calm. "Start there, Mr. Polk. Cobb buried it in 1955 for Dr. Finch. Who killed Eliza? Then check the riverbank near the reeds. Finch's journal says he hid her there." She handed Polk the journal, its pages marked, and stepped back. Her knitting bag on her arm. Cobb shuffled forward, his voice low. "Under that stone, a foot down. I buried it deep." Polk nodded, digging carefully. The spade scraped loud in the morning quiet. Lila stood close to Miss Marple, her shawl tight, her face pale. Miss Marple's needles clicked in her bag. Her eyes locked on the earth, her heart steady but heavy. After a few minutes, Polk's spade hit something hard. He knelt, brushing dirt away, and lifted a small, tarnished locket, its heart shape and rose engraving clear in the sunlight. Lila gasped, her hand on Miss Marple's arm, and Cobb's face crumpled, his eyes wet. "That's it," he muttered. "Eliza's." Polk opened it, revealing a tiny photo of a young man, too faded to identify. Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her face stayed calm. The locket was proof, tying Cobb to Finch's crime. "Well done," Miss Marple said, her voice soft. "Now the riverbank. Mr. Polk, look near those reeds, under stones or roots." Coke nodded, moving to the water's edge, where the river gurgled slow and green. He and Cobb searched, lifting rocks and probing the mud, while Miss Marple and Lila watched, the air thick with tension. After an hour, Polk called out, his voice sharp, "Here, Miss Marple." He'd found a bundle under a pile of stones wrapped in a tattered shawl. Inside was a small skeleton, worn by time and a few scraps of cloth matching Eliza's apron. The locket's twin, a simpler chain, lay tangled in the bones, its rose engraving faint but sure. Lila sobbed, her shawl slipping, and Cobb looked away, his face gray. Miss Marple's heart sank, but her eyes were steel. "That's Eliza," she said, her voice steady. "The shawl, the locket, they match my diary. Take it to the coroner, Mr. Polk." Polk nodded, his face grim. "This is murder, Miss Marple. Finch is dead, but Cobb's in trouble for hiding it. I'll need your notes." He bagged the remains and locket, his hands careful, and led Cobb away, promising to return for statements. Miss Marple turned to Lila, her voice soft. "You were brave, dear. Go rest. This is hard, but it's right." Lila nodded, her eyes wet, and hurried to the house. Miss Marple stood by the oak, her cane tapping, her mind weaving the clues. The apron's stain, the shawl's blood, the oily cloth, the vial, the letter, the disturbed earth, Cobb's digging, Finch's journal, the locket, the bones, they all fit. Eliza had met Finch by the stables, argued, and died in a fall, her body hidden by the river. Cobb's silence, bought with coin, had buried the truth until now. Back at her cottage, Miss Marple sat by the fire, the diary open. She added the locket's find and the bones' discovery, sketching the riverbank beside the oak. The clues told Eliza's story, her fear, her locket, the meeting, the struggle, the cover-up. Finch's journal damned him, and Cobb's confession sealed it. The locket's photo, too faded to name, hinted at a sweetheart, maybe the letter's recipient. But it didn't change the crime. Her needles clicked, her mind steady. The case was nearly closed, but she'd meet Polk tomorrow to hand over her notes and ensure justice. She stood, her cane tapping, and looked out her window. St. Mary Mead glowed in the afternoon sun. Its peace restored but scarred. Eliza's face, shy and scared, filled her mind. The truth was out, like a scarf finished and folded. The diary had led her here, and her sharp eyes had done the rest, one careful stitch at a time. Chapter 10. A quiet close. The late afternoon sun cast a warm glow over St. Mary Mead, softening the village's neat cottages and winding paths. Miss Jane Marple sat in her cozy cottage, the fire crackling gently, her knitting needles clicking as she finished her gray scarf. The leather diary from 1955 rested on the table, its pages now a closed book on the mystery of Eliza Gray, the young maid who vanished from Dane Mead House after a summer party. The police had called her a runaway, but Miss Marple's notes stating Eliza's fear, a missing locket, a stained shawl, and an overheard argument had pointed to foul play. Her finds an apron with a blood-like stain, an oil-soaked cloth, a medical vial. Disturbed earth by the riverbank, Mr. Cobb's midnight digging, a letter signed E.G. Dr. Finch's journal. And Eliza's remains had solved the case. Dr. Finch killed Eliza, and Cobb hid the truth. But now justice was served and Miss Marple could rest. Though her sharp eyes stayed open for the next puzzle, Miss Marple sipped her tea, the cup warm in her hands, and reflected on the case. Eliza, 19 and shy, had trembled at the 1955 party, scared of Mr. Cobb, who dug by the riverbank. Her heart-shaped locket with a rose engraving, always worn, was missing when her shawl was found, stained with blood. An argument by the stables. Mr. Bantry's sharp voice against an unknown man's had caught her ear. The apron stained from Dame Mead's attic, the oily cloth and vial from the stables. The fresh earth by the river, Cobb's lies, the letter begging for a meeting by the oak. Mrs. Bantry's memory of Dr. Finch's odd behavior, Finch's journal. Confessing the killing, and Cobb's admission of hiding the locket wove a tight web. Yesterday's search by the riverbank with Constable Pauck, Lila Trent, and Cobb had found Eliza's bones and the locket, tying Finch to murder and Cobb to concealment. The case was closed, but its echoes lingered. She tucked the diary into her knitting bag, its weight lighter now. Thought of the village. St. Mary Mead had buzzed with the news. Tommy's rumor about the lockets spreading like wildfire. Mrs. Price at the bakery had brought scones this morning. Her eyes wide as she asked, was it really Dr. Finch? And poor Eliza found at last. Tommy, the grocer's boy, had lingered by her gate, whispering, "Did you see the bones, Miss Marple? Was it spooky?" She'd smiled, given vague answers, and sent them off with kind words. The truth was hers to hold, like a finished scarf. And she didn't need to flaunt it. Miss Marple's mind turned to the players in Eliza's story. Cobb, grizzled and broken, faced charges for hiding a crime, his confession spilling under the oak's shadow. His silence bought by Finch's. Quaint had buried Eliza's truth for 10 years, but his digging had betrayed him. Miss Marple felt no triumph, only a quiet sadness he'd been a small man, swayed by greed, not a killer. Dr. Finch, long dead, was the true villain, his journal revealing a man who charmed but harmed. His confession luring Eliza to the stables, arguing, causing her fatal fall, damned him, and the vile and oily cloth marked his crime. The locket's faded photo, a young man's face, hinted at a sweetheart. Maybe the letter's recipient, but it didn't change the facts. Lila Trent, nervous but brave, had been vital. Her letter and help at the riverbank, key to the truth. Miss Marple hoped she'd find peace in Dame Mead. Its heavy air lighter now. Mrs. Bantry, frail but sharp, had given clarity, her memory of Finch's behavior and the stable's argument a spark in the dark. The village itself, with its gossip and nosy hearts, had played a role. Tommy's rumor spreading the trap that caught Cobb. Miss Marple's needles clicked, her mind weaving their parts, fear, greed, courage, memory into Eliza's story. A tale of human nature, tangled but true. She stood, her cane tapping, and walked to her window. The garden was peaceful, its roses nodding in the breeze. St. Mary Mead was small, its cottages cozy, and its people curious, but it was home. The case had stirred the village like a stone in a pond, and the ripples would linger. Eliza's story, once a ghost tale, was now a tragedy mourned by all. Miss Marple's role would fade into whispers. She liked it that way. Fame was loud, and she preferred her quiet life, her tea, her knitting. Her thoughts turned to the riverbank, where Eliza's bones and locket had been found. The shawl, the locket's rose engraving, the bones worn by time, they matched the diary's clues closing the circle. The oily cloth, the vial, the letters smell, they pointed to the stables. Where Finch's crime began, Cobb's digging, the disturbed earth. His confession, they sealed his part. The diary had been her guide, its notes a thread through the years. And her trap, simple but sharp, had brought the truth to light. Miss Marple felt a quiet pride, not for glory, but for Eliza, whose voice was heard at last. She sat again, her knitting in her lap, and opened the diary one last time. Its pages, yellowed but clear, held the case's heart. Eliza's fear, the locket's sketch, the argument's echo. She added a final note, her handwriting steady. May 1965, Liza Gray. Found, killed by Dr. Finch, hidden by Mr. Cobb. Locket and bones recovered. Justice done. Ski closed the diary, tying its ribbon, and placed it on the shelf. Its secrets told. Ski, the fire popped, and her needles clicked, a rhythm that steadied her thoughts. The scarf was done, its gray wool, soft and even, a mirror of the case, small stitches, carefully joined, making something whole. Miss Marple thought of Leela, who'd offered a reward yesterday, her face bright with gratitude. "You've freed the house," she'd said, holding out a small purse. Miss Marple had refused, asking only for tea and a quiet chat. Leela's trust, like Mrs. Bantry's memory and Tommy's help, was her true reward, stronger than coin. Mead. House, once heavy with secrets, could heal. And Eliza's memory would live in a memorial Lila planned. A simple stone by the river. The village would talk of the case for months, Miss Marple knew. Mrs. Price would spin tales at the bakery. Tommy would boast of his spying, and the locket would become legend. But St. Mary Mead would settle, its peace restored, its scars fading. Cobb would face a judge, his silence punished, and Finch's name would tarnish, his charm a lie. Miss Marple hoped Eliza's family, if any remained, would find comfort, though. The diary's faded photos suggested a lost love, a story untold. She stood, her cane tapping, and set the kettle on. The evening was coming, and St. Mary Mead glowed in the dusk, its cottages warm with light. Miss Marple's garden, where she'd sit tomorrow, was her haven, its roses a quiet joy. The diary, now a treasure of her past, would stay on its shelf, ready for another day. Her mind, sharp as her needles, was already open, waiting for the next Pazula lost cat, a stolen purse, a whispered feud. The village was small, but trouble. Found it, and she'd solve it her way. With patience and a keen eye, Miss Marple poured her tea, the steam curling in the air. The fire burned low, and her needles clicked, a rhythm of calm. Eliza's case was her biggest yet, a cold trail warmed by her diary's spark. But to Miss Marple, it was just another scarf, another pattern, finished and set aside. Human nature, fear, greed, love, lies had woven the web, and she'd untangled it. Stitch by stitch. St. Mary Mead was hers again, peaceful but alive, and she was ready for whatever came next.